Welcome back to the Movement Professional Podcast. So today we're going to continue on the theme of common misconceptions seen in the strength and conditioning as well as the healthcare space. So today we're going to talk specifically about strength training misconceptions. So the first misconception is that using weights is the same thing as strength training. All right, so this is a common one that you see, and the way that it's often exemplified is you just see people walking and then they'll just add weights to it. They'll walk with weights, or very commonly in a spinning class, at the very end of a spinning class, you'll get the light weights and you'll just move the weights around. You're getting your biceps, getting whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, but it's just sort of you're trying to kill two birds with one stone, and you're really not making the intention to get stronger. So I think it's really important to understand that you don't necessarily have to use heavy weights, but the major key when we're looking at strength training is that there's a progressive overload idea. So it means there needs to be a plan, right? So just the act of using weights does not incorporate or does not include strength training, or is not the same thing as strength training. And I think that's really important to understand. And that's certainly a common misconception that I see. Number two would be that strength work has to be max effort style training, or it has to be really hard training. And that also isn't true. Again, so the key is that things are progressively getting harder as the body adapts. And I think that the key is that the body needs to adapt. So you can move at your own speed with strength training. And oftentimes with clients that I have, I like to start them easier than it needs to be, because that's what they feel safe with early on. Especially if you're a novice to strength training, it's pretty easy to make gains and be able to do harder things. So when we're thinking about strength training, it's not necessarily the same thing as building more muscle, although a lot of times hypertrophy gains will come with strength gains, but they're different intentions. And we'll do another podcast about misconceptions around hypertrophy. But with strength, the idea is that we're looking to be able to do harder things than we're currently doing gradually over time. And then ultimately what's happening from a physiological standpoint is that we're looking to produce more force in our muscles. All right, so in order to do that, we can be pretty gradual with it, and it never has to feel that hard. It just has to be progressively harder. So if you start sort of learning movement patterns, starting a little bit too easy, you have some buffer that you can build, and you want to just give yourself time to adapt to the load that you've been doing for a little while. And adaptation and giving yourself time, kind of works in two ways. You got to see how you feel during a session, and then you also have to see how you feel after a session. And that's certainly a lesson I've learned, and a mistake I've made many times is just because people feel good in a session, I might push them a little bit harder. And if it's a new stimulus to them, they'll feel a lot worse the next day. And it just gets in the way of having a positive experience with movement and continuing to move forward. So with anything in training, the number one principle is consistency is the key, because without consistency, nothing changes. You're never going to make big changes in one session. You may feel like you get a really good workout. You may get a nice stimulus that kind of gives you energy for the day or makes you feel calm for the day. So you definitely make mood changes in one session, but you're not going to be able to make physiological changes, health changes, unless you're consistent with it. And consistency equals learning. So as you're more consistent, you learn how to adapt for your own body, but your body is also learning how to adapt to the stimulus that you're giving it. So with strength training, the key is you have to use some type of load, and it doesn't have to be external weights, but it has to be some type of load that you're progressively adding more, and you're adding more challenge as your body adapts. So it does not have to be max effort, and very rarely do we really want to get there. Sometimes if you actually have a competitive goal of powerlifting, you want to see what your max is, because that's what you're going to be training in the competition. But if you're just trying to do strength training for health, you never have to touch a max effort. But you have to work at an effort that is challenging, but it just has to be progressively harder over time. And as you build more experience with strength training, you'll enjoy the process of working a little bit harder, but it's just a little bit harder than what you've been doing before. And then the third misconception is that strength training is dangerous. So again, this really comes right off of the second one. is if you understand that it should and can be a very slow and gradual process, it doesn't have to be dangerous at all. And the idea is that you're giving your body time to adapt to progressively more load, more challenge. Your body will then be able to produce more force over time. All right. And I think the key too is to look at strength. To me, is one of the easiest and safest things to work with patients that have some type of pain. And now it might not look like, again, a real high intensity strength training program, but the principles of strength training often are slower movements, and they're also lower in repetition. So the volume doesn't have to be as high when we're building initial strength. It's just gradually doing more. So to me, strength training is one of the safest starting points, even for those who are in pain and working around an injury, because we can be slow and we can work around symptoms. And there's also just not as much volume that's necessary. And so that could be like the first phase of trying to train the body into fitness, is get yourself to tolerate progressively more challenge. And then we can add a little volume to it. We can add repetitions to it. And oftentimes the body responds to more repetitions with a little bit more acid and, soreness and damage, where early on the nervous system is being more stimulated when you're trying to produce more force in the muscles. So again, the lower repetition range that happens within strength training, and then the slow by nature type of movement patterns that come with strength training, make it actually quite a bit safer than some of the other movement patterns that people will kind of enjoy doing and then maybe do too much of. So the other way to look at how strength training can be different and actually safer is a lot of injuries that are seen are overuse injuries, right? And they're overuse from things that people are already doing. They're already comfortable with. People already don't think they're dangerous. And then all of a sudden you do a little bit too much of it because there's not enough variability or versatility in your movement practice. And then that's where the injury comes. When you add strength training into the game, especially if you're someone who's not used to doing strength training, it actually gives you a different stimulus to your body. But again, it's in shorter bouts. So it provides a little bit of variability in how you contract your muscles. It gives you a lot of physiological health benefits that would be necessary. But because it's different, it makes it actually a little bit safer because it varies the load that you're getting too much of. And I think that is really important. And it's sort of a backwards or non-intuitive way of looking at healthy exercise. Again, oftentimes we do too much of things we can already do. So especially if strength training is foreign, it becomes actually less dangerous if done well, if done with this kind of gradual, progressive overload, progressive adaptation model in mind. So hopefully that was useful. If you have any questions, please reach out at movementprofessional.com. I'll see you next time.